Welcome to Your Music Saved Us, where two friends blast ourselves into the past to relive and recontextualize the alternative Christian music we grew up listening to in the 1990s. Except, not again this week. We're doing this a lot, I guess. So this week we are just talking to each other. So Jay and I are in the same place for the first time in...
8 years.
There you go, 8 years. Jeez. It's a long time.
It is a really long time.
Jay, this was your idea. You want to explain what you were thinking?
Well, I just thought since it's the first time we've hung out in the flesh in 8 years, it might be fun to ask each other a few questions and just track with that. I'm sure we'll talk music, we'll talk Christianity, we'll talk all that stuff, but different vibe. A lot of people may skip this episode, but
that's fine.
You shouldn't, because I think it will be good.
Yeah. You can see where we're coming from.
There you go.
Yeah. All right. You want to start with a question? Or you want me to start with a question?
Yeah, I guess, Clifton, take me back to growing up in the church. Let's start with church before we start with music, because at least for me, I think I have memories of that before I have memories of, well, at least rock music and that kind of thing. So kind of, I don't know, tell me about growing up in your church and that experience and just, faith as a kid, any individual memories you have, some of your earliest memories of that.
So I grew up attending First Baptist Church, Wichita Falls, which my parents started attending after I was born. They weren't really religious before then. And the church actually offered a basketball and a volleyball league. It's a giant church. It's this really weird church where it's even bigger today. But even back then it was huge, physically. The building was huge. It had a gymnasium. It had right off the gymnasium, separated by a movable wall, was another a gathering place that was as big as the gymnasium again. And off of that was what we call the CLC, the Christian Life Center. That had pool tables and arcade games and a bowling alley with three lanes, literally a pottery studio with a kiln. And this is all just this is one side of the church, and this probably doesn't account for 10% of the size of the church. What was the question again? My parents my parents joined there not long after I was born. So I kind of grew up in that, Some of my earliest memories were of my earliest memories. So the pastor that was there when I was growing up, his name was Chapman, Morris Chapman. And he was pretty big in the Southern Baptist Convention. He was Southern Baptist president for several terms, I think. And one of my earliest memories in churches, which is kind of sad, is being in a Christian service. I was probably 5 or 6 years old, and just being told that I was going to hell and that I needed to repent, and at 5 or 6 years old, I didn't know what that meant, and I was well, I'm sure as shit scared, But other than that, I also have good memories of early on, of especially growing up with the CLC and stuff, the Christian Life Center. They had parents' night out and stuff like that. So literally our parents would just drop us off there, and there'd be 30 to 50 kids up there with probably one adult trying to corral us all, playing pool and playing video games and playing in the gym. They actually didn't let us into the bowling alley that much, even though there was a bowling alley there. So I remember playing pool a lot, and I remember this. There was another room that off of the gymnasium that had all kinds of supplies in it and had weird games in it too. Remember those old weird games that you see in Cracker Barrel and stuff like that, where it's just pegs and boards, and there were all kinds of different versions of pegs and board games and stuff like that. There's also a kitchen in that thing. Jeez, it's a huge building.
So were you at church definitely multiple days a week, multiple nights a week?
Yeah, we were, Monday nights we were there for Monday nights were meet at the church, have a dinner, and then go out to visitation. Go out and invite people to the church. That's visitation, okay. Right? Wednesday nights were Wednesday night services. So there weren't any Wednesday night services for the kids, and so we just really hung out in the CLC, and did that.
Okay.
But before that, there was a dinner. So like they literally like cooked a dinner, like, and it. I remember always getting a baked potato. But you could you could get like they always served random things. I remember one of my dad's friends they always used to serve chicken cordon bleu, and he always called it chicken solo shoe because it wasn't very good. It's a cafeteria in the end.
Right.
But I remember always doing that. I remember one of my friends would always like they would have like all the condiments to go on a baked potato and like all like the condiments to go with tea, and he would always like make weird concoctions out of those and dare everyone to drink them with like hot sauce and lemon juice and all kinds of stuff together. So that's a lot of my memories of childhood are that kind of thing, or like so that's Wednesday nights, and then of course Sundays were of course church service and Sunday school, and the church is so big that at one point there were actually 3 church services, but most of the time there was 2 church services. So there was an early service and a late service. And depending on when your Sunday school was, because there weren't enough facilities for everyone to have Sunday school at the same time, even though it's a giant church. Although for much of my childhood, some of the church was like unoccupied, even though we probably needed space, which was always fun to sneak around those parts, which we also did on Wednesday nights. So you would have either early or late, Sunday school, and you would go to the opposite church service. So definitely, and then Sunday night was also another service, and we were always there for that too. And that once again they would usually have a kids thing for that if it was young. By the time there was youth group, though, of course, there was the whole when I first started youth group at 7th grade, there was a youth group in the main building, but by the next year they'd actually bought another building across the street, which was a 4-story office building that they turned into the youth building. And then that's where the youth services were held on the top floor of that. And then the bottom 3 floors were like Sunday school rooms and all that kind of stuff. And so there was that, of course. And but the only time there was a separate youth thing was on Wednesdays, of course. But yeah, so I grew up we were, and then if you take into account like that, we probably spent, half the Fridays in a year at Parents' Day Out. We were probably there like, what's that, 1, 2, 3, 4 days a week at least,
Wow.
My earliest birthday parties were at church.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's where everything was done. Like my mom went to pottery class at church. It's just everything. Like, yeah.
What about music? Were your first memories of music that you liked, was that through church? Was that something separate? Like, what was that?
No, music is very different for me. So, like I said, my parents weren't very religious. So, even as a young kid, we listened to like my earliest memories of music were listening to Michael Jackson on pop radio, and things like that. Like my dad had a very large vinyl collection, of anything from Boston and Led Zeppelin to, Michael Jackson of the time and all kinds of stuff, But then later on, probably in the early 90s, there was a big shift where like my parents started listening to country music. And so there's a lot of country music in my life after that.
But no explicitly like Christian music, at least.
I was in the choir, but like I wasn't like interested, like, any music that I had interest in. I remember calling on the radio station, and requesting, Michael Jackson or other pop songs of the time,
Mm-hmm.
literally with my dad, or my dad would call in sometimes and request it in my name, and like I remember coming on the radio and be like, oh my,
That's nice.
Yeah. Yeah. So I remember like there was the house that we lived in when I was that age, around 8 or so, had like a big room in the back. Later became my bedroom when my other sister was born, like through, kind of shifted around, right? But I remember like us being back there and like dancing around to the radio and stuff like that, and yeah.
So when did you start listening to more, Christian music?
Well, like my interest in music specifically, like I said, so I remember listening to Michael Jackson. Like the very first, I don't remember if the first music I bought specifically was Christian music or if it was country music, not Christian music, if it was pop music or if it was country music. but it was one of the two. I remember like buying, what was that? Like a country group. I remember buying a country album like very early on in my like, probably like 10 to 12 age, But I also listened to that at that same around that same time. I also remember listening to a lot of Boyz II Men and a lot of Mariah Carey. In fact, I mean, when I found the very next thing that happened after that was finding things like, finding like those compilations and stuff like that, the music, the Christian Story, and it's like I was literally like went from like Boyz II Men to probably like Audio Adrenaline or something like that, or Newsboys, or really Stephen Chris Chapman and stuff like that, and Jeff Moore in the Distance.
Did your parents pressure you to do that, or did you just kind of on your own?
I think I just on my own. Yeah, I think it's probably a youth group type pressure, where it was like, you gotta keep it in the faith type thing, Right. And I also remember one of my very first music experiences was because I lived in Wichita Falls, so even like, even things that would come to Amarillo didn't come to Wichita Falls, right? Yeah. So one of my very first musical experiences live was, I think it was 7th grade, like the summer after 7th grade youth camp, which was just a junior high camp because our youth group was so big that it had a junior high camp and a high school camp. So at junior high camp after 7th grade, the last night they had Jeff Moore in the Distance live at the camp, and it wasn't just like our church; it was like a bunch of different churches at this camp, And I remember like specifically being like thinking it was the coolest thing in the world, and there were other people there who thought it was lame. I was like, "Come on, this is great!" Like, yeah, I believe in evolution. Anyways,
Right.
I don't even know if I knew who they were before that, honestly, but I definitely listened to them after that.
But they seemed so cool because they were a band that you were seeing live and like, right.
Yeah, they had guitars and stuff,
Yeah.
They were a real rock band. Yeah. And so that's probably even the first thing that I really, I probably had listened to a little bit of Stephen Chris Chapman before that, but I definitely hadn't listened to like, there definitely wasn't Audio Adrenaline or Newsboys. Those were cutting edge when I found those, that was pushing the limits.
Right.
So yeah, it's probably like Stephen Chris Chapman into Jeff Moore in the Distance.
So did that one thing just led to another? Stephen Chris Chapman, Jeff Moore, and then Jeff Moore to Audio Adrenaline, just as you kind of.
Well, it's probably also just youth group type influences. Right. There was probably like played in like literally like played before youth group type thing. Like while everyone's like chatting and stuff like that, there's music played and stuff like that. So I think that's probably where I heard like Audio Adrenaline. I know that's where I heard Newsboys.
Mm-hmm.
Also, DC Talk. That's probably also needs to be in there as well. DC Talk probably came before Audio Adrenaline and Newsboys. It was probably more in the Stephen Chris Chapman phase. It's probably Stephen Chris Chapman and DC Talk, and then that kind of phased into the Audio Adrenaline and Newsboys stuff. So that brings us up to basically me starting to listen to Christian music. Do you want to turn around and how did you were you always brought up in the church?
Yeah, similar to you. I don't know when my parents got serious about it, but my earliest memories is always going to church, pretty steady. I think what happened with them is the church that I went to, which was a lot like you, a Southern Baptist church in Amarillo, Texas, in my town like yours. They had a good children's ministry. Mm-hmm. So when I was born, my parents were looking for something like that with like a, kind of a preschool program and Mother's Day out and all that stuff. And so I think they got pretty involved then, and they just got more and more involved as I got older.
Yeah.
And we had a pretty big children's ministry and all that. I remember growing up. And so I was a lot like you, pretty plugged in from an early age. I remember being there Sunday mornings, Sunday nights, Wednesdays for sure. And you're right. I remember we would serve a meal too. So it's like me and my knucklehead friends, doing stupid stuff, like mixing stuff together and eating it, or shooting butter packets out, and like, just like real dumb stuff. But, my memories are like, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, kind of just being knucklehead kids.
Yeah.
Visitation, that's one that sounds familiar, but I don't remember if we did that or not. Your Monday night visitation. We might have.
Yeah. It was off and on for us, but it was overall on.
Yeah. It's interesting. I hadn't really even heard that word in a long time until you said it. But same thing, like all of kind of elementary school, just being pretty involved with church. And I think one thing that is important to point out for me, and I would venture to guess it was probably similar for you, is it was almost like you had two social worlds. Like I had the school world.
Yes.
And I had a lot of, friends in that and stuff I was involved in, like Cub Scouts and different, I was never really sports kids, but I tried sports occasionally, different things like that. And in the social church world, and they overlapped some because I had some people who went to that and they weren't completely separate, but it was definitely like another social scene. And as I got into probably middle and high school with youth group, that was probably where I really felt mostly myself, was moving probably more at church than at school. So yeah, I relate to that a lot. Music for me, my mom always really liked music. And when I was really little, I remember she had Billy Joel, I think the album was called Innocent Man. And I remember a lot of those songs because she listened to it a lot. But somewhere around that time, she must have gotten more into Christian music, because really what I remember her listening to a lot was like Sandy Patty, Larnell Harris, those type of artists a lot growing up. And then that kind of bled over to me. And I started getting into like, Christian music, even as an elementary school kid. I think just because my mom was into it. So if she went to the Christian bookstore, she'd let me look at stuff.
Interesting.
And so I remember getting into like Petra a little bit. DeGarmo and Key, I really liked. Some other really like kind of terrible Christian pop and like early Christian rap. I'm talking like early DC Talk, like New Thing, or even their album before that. There was a probably really bad Christian rap group called JC Crew that I thought were super cool when I was like 5th or 6th grade. Some of that really early stuff. I mean, I even had a subscription to CCM magazine when I was like 11 or 12. I remember calling into the Christian radio show one time. They had like a little quiz and call in, and I won the prize. And I remember the DJ being astounded that this kid that sounded so young knew what I was talking about, but I just read it. He was like, "How do you know?" I was like, "I read it in CCM magazine." So I was kind of a nerd. I guess that was just like my scene already. I was really into that stuff.
What was the Christian bookstore that you went to?
So I had, there were multiple ones in town. There was a Baptist bookstore called High Plains Baptist Bookstore. I know it actually became pretty big. It was like a locally owned one. There was a Family Christian store. I think it was called Zondervan, but then it shifted into Family Christian. And there were a couple of other ones that were in town too. And so just depending on what era, we kind of went to one or the other. But yeah, that was kind of it's hard to remember a time when we didn't go to those. So
it's interesting because when I was the one who had to ask my parents to go to the Christian bookstore when I started listening to that kind of music. Yeah, so I had to like make my own way there, I guess, a little bit. So yeah.
Yeah, no, mine definitely kind of brought me into that. And I liked some stuff that wasn't. My dad doesn't listen to oldies. And I remember I really liked like the California Raisins. You remember that?
Yes.
When that was a big thing. So some stuff, but pretty quickly I got into that. I mean, I liked like, MC Hammer, Boyz II Men, Mariah Carey a little bit when that was out too. But it was definitely quickly, I think my parents tried to funnel me into the Christian music thing, and I was all about it. I was loving it. So, yeah, I mean, overall, fairly similar story.
Did you have, I just remembered that we had Rural Ambassadors, RA. Did you have Rural Ambassadors?
Oh, we did have RA, which was kind of like church's version of Boy Scouts. Not exactly, but...
yeah, different, yeah. I never did Scouts because I played sports, so that took up most of my time. But that's what we actually, when they could find a leader for us, we did it Rural Ambassadors. Remember, we did a lot of like the downslope car racing, like with the little wooden cars.
Pinewood Derby.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah, so I was in Scouts, but I did RA too for a little bit, but then ended up doing Scouts more. But yeah, similar thing. I've forgotten all about that, but you're right.
Me too, yeah.
So
I remember just spending so much time like where you put the weight on this car, and like how much graphite do you use?
Yep.
Yeah, the shape of the car, and like I always lost. It didn't matter, but still.
Yeah. It's good times.
It was fun. Yeah. And the stupid little vest that never felt quite comfortable, and
yeah. So what was the first maybe Christian artist that you were listening to that you finally felt like, okay, these guys are really cool. Like this is not. I've gone past just cheesy church stuff. This is it.
I think that's definitely Plank Eye for me.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I got into them as I was like, so, after the Newsboys and but like not long, like I'm talking like months, But after kind of I got into Newsboys and Audio Adrenaline, I found Plank Eye. But I was also listening to like Three Crosses and Big Tent Revival at the same time, But definitely I could tell that Plank Eye was different.
Sure.
Right? I don't think I really understood what Tooth and Nail was at that exact point that I found them. But I do know that was, there was something about it. There was an edge to it that grabbed me more than it didn't feel like just some industry produced product, right? Mm-hmm. It felt like these were guys who were like doing something, like they were trying to say something and they were trying to do their own thing, It's
funny because we're 14 or 15 at the time, not really super critical age of stuff, but I was similar. Like, I think Poor Old Lou was the band for me that was like that the same kind of thought of like, okay, this seems different. This seems a little more legit.
Yeah.
Somehow this doesn't seem as cheesy, prepackaged, like a little bit edgier. That was the first band for me that seemed to have a little more credibility, even though, I mean, I don't know who I was going to talk to about them, but it just,
I guess how did your friend group, like, were they all involved in music too?
Yeah, so that's a good point. My friends that I was hanging out with were more centered around church than they were school, even though most of them went to the same, honestly, the same middle and high school for the most part. But we really were connected in church more because I might not always have the same classes with them. And we were all starting to kind of explore the same type of like alternative Christian music around the same time. Give or take a little bit. One person would find something, another person would find something different. Some of it,
Were you talking about music? Were you talking about even things before it was Poor Lou? Were you like, hey, this new Newsboys album is great,
Yeah, a little bit. I think I was definitely into Newsboys. I loved Not Ashamed and Going Public, those two albums. Steve Taylor, who we haven't really covered directly yet on the show, but that Squint album was another one for me that I was kind of like, this is a little different, and this seems edgier.
Yeah.
And my friends were kind of doing the same thing with other albums and things, so that helped. I had a small group of a couple of friends that were at least, trying it.
Yeah. I remember I had my tight group of friends was probably, there were four of us. And we actually one of us went to the same middle school or junior high, but the other two went to different ones. But we were just church where we were connected. Even though my good friend Stuart, we actually kind of really connected over the first thing we ever did together, just two of us, was going to a Star Trek convention in town.
There you go.
So us huge nerds watching TNG at the time. And Armin Shimmerman was there. It was great, but.
I have no idea who that is, but anyway.
Yeah. But we definitely talked about music. I don't think it really became like a deep. It wasn't deep conversations. It was more just like, hey, you gotta listen to this album, kind of thing. Or we would just, like go home with. Especially as we got into high school, we would like go home. Like one of us would have one of our parents pick us up or something like that, and we'd be like, "You drop us off at Mardell on the way home, like we'll walk from there," kind of thing.
Mardell was the Christian bookstore.
Yes. Yeah, Mardell was the Christian bookstore.
Well, and it was kind of a different period in time because there's no internet,
right?
Or we were not on it. Right, yeah. Even music magazines of this scene, I'm talking early on. Seven Ball didn't exist. Nope. There was some really small underground ones that me and you in our towns in Texas were not getting because there's no like scene around us.
Right.
The Christian bookstore was our access to this. And so it may be HM magazine, and that was just starting to, in my opinion, go less metal and cover some more stuff.
Yeah.
So there wasn't a lot of ways to find out about this. So it was kind of a lot of times like, I went to the Christian bookstore. A lot of times they would have demo tapes or demo CDs, which was huge.
Huge.
So you could like listen to it before you bought it. And so you're right. You would go with your friends. You pull a bunch of stuff off the shelf and get the demos. And like, we even had one like a little listening booth. So it was cool. So you could like be in there without headphones, like multiple people. Nice. And so we put it on and be like, this is cool. Or like, you put something on like, nah, not for us. Yeah. And so that's how you found out about stuff, and you had whatever money you had, and you might buy an album, maybe your friend bought a different one.
Exactly,
and you just kind of like listened to it and shared, and that's what you did.
Yeah, a lot, yes. And how we came up with money, I don't know. I think I just like, my parents would give me money for lunch, and I would buy like the cheapest lunch that you could and save the rest, and that's how I would buy albums.
My parents definitely for a while were like, if you're listening to Christian music, we'll buy it. So it's not like I had an endless supply, but they would be like more open to buying stuff for me if I was getting Christian music. I don't remember if they ever said I couldn't have secular, but that was their way of kind of like funneling me towards that. Yeah. So I remember that time period where I finally was kind of like, okay, poor old Lou, some of these other bands, this seems more legit. I like this. It doesn't seem as cheesy. And that was I started kind of putting my identity, I think, partially into some of that, like, oh, alternative Christian music. This is me. This is cool. And kind of carried that, honestly. That was like late middle school into early high school. And that's kind of just was my world all of high school, I think, were those kind of bands and that scene. Even though I say scene, even though I think probably for both of us, we didn't really have a scene in our town. It was just what we could plug into from these albums and this music.
Yeah, there was a very big changing point in my life, which was in the very beginning of my sophomore year of high school. When I'd already been listening to like, Plank Guy, and I think I'd even gotten a little bit into I definitely had gotten a little bit into like punk and stuff like that, But I ended up having in my English class was someone who would become a very good friend of mine, Justin. And actually, Stuart and Justin and I were at the same high school, and we actually ended up in that same English class altogether. And Justin was actually at that time was the lead singer of a punk band in town, with some older kids, And when we met, it just kind of blew everything wide open, And so that was like a real exposure to like a bunch of like, and I kind of knew all that was there, but like it was just more in your, like that was my scene, I guess, was
this like Christian punk or like regular punk? Or
they were in a Christian punk band in town. Yes.
Okay. Wow.
Yes. Yeah. I forgot. I don't remember what they were called at the time. Actually, Jelly Bean Polka was the name of their band.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. And so when we met, that's when like we really like this is also the same time like that 5 Iron Frenzy album, the first one came out, was in 96. Because I remember it didn't release until 97 on 5 Minute Walk, but they did a self-release, I guess, in 96. And that's when I remember listening to it. Because I remember listening to it in my car, being driven by other people. Well, not in my car, sorry, in other people's cars, because I couldn't drive yet. So that has to be 96. And so that's when I first found it. So that was, and it was all that kind of just exploded all at the same time. And that's kind of two things that did explosion kind of at the same time.
Right.
And so that whole time, right, that 96 time, into 95, beginning of 96, that just, everything blew up. And that's when I just found everything, Goaty Hook and Value Pack. And yeah, so that was a big changing point for me was meeting Justin and just having more exposure to this stuff. Not just more exposure, but like almost like more like credibility to listening to it, and it not just being something I'm doing, right? Not just like, because I guess I was to some extent afraid, like even though I was blazing my own trail, I guess I was afraid to push the boundaries too hard, too fast, I guess, because there was always a question of, well, is that Bloodshed album really, because they're screaming, so is it really Christian, If you can't understand every word, how Christian can it really be?
So did it feel validating to have other people that were
exactly
into that too?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I think that's when kind of my identity. Well, I don't. That's not true. My identity was kind of wrapped up in it before then, but really that was like the solidifying point of, like, it really changed right then. Yeah.
Did you have in high school, were there any like, I'm doing air quotes, secular bands that you got into too at the same time? Were there any you remember, or was it all Christian?
So this early on, no.
Okay.
No, there was, and I don't know that there was a lot of preaching time done on like don't listen to secular music, but there was a lot of preaching time done on like keep your influences pure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like got to watch out for what you watch and what you listen to, what you put in your head. And so I never sought out secular music. I only sought out Christian music for that reason, and even to the point where we would debate, like, is this Christian enough for us to listen to?
Right.
Such as the Huntingtons, or Bloodshed, or. So no, but then by the end of high school, I was definitely listening to, Less Than Jake,
Right.
and a few other secular things, Now, and you kind of can't help but hear, Blink-182 and Green Day,
Sure,
and
yeah,
things like that, obviously, and yeah, but no, I never. Especially early on, not until like probably my senior year, I didn't seek out anything. Yeah. What about you?
I did a little bit, and sometimes I felt guilty and bad about it. But it was funny because it was the Christian music that would lead me to the quote unquote secular. Like, right. I remember I got that Operation Ivy
That's
album
what I was going to ask you about. Yeah,
because I think Mike Herrera had a sticker on his guitar, and I saw them at Cornerstone in '96, and bands like that had been around, they didn't obviously exist at the time, but had been already established. You would see that logo some other places, and you used to start, what's that? And then you see it at the store finally, and you're like, I want to buy it.
Yeah.
Then listen to it, and I was like, oh my God, this is really good.
Was that before or after Squad 5-0?
I think it might have been before. Yeah. It's hard to say. It was sometime in high school when I was into that ska punk stuff, and you listen to it, and you're like, they're kind of like the standard bearers of it. It's like so good.
Oh, yeah.
But I also remember being like, oh, there's bad words in this and I feel bad. But it's so catchy, and just having this like back and forth with myself.
But then you listen to like the lyrics and like, what can you even complain about in the lyrics other than like a bad word every time?
Right. But back then, that's the problem, is I was missing like the forest for the trees, right? I would just hear bad words and automatically like, whoop, forgetting the rest of the messages in that. Mineral was another band that, because I would go down rabbit holes and like, start to get little zines and other stuff, and somehow because of Tess Wiley and Phantasmic, who I really liked, and they had that song on one of the Artcore things.
Yeah.
So I saw her at Cornerstone, and I remember she was saying like, because her brother was a drummer in Mineral, and I remember he played with her, and I think maybe one or two of the other guys, and then she was like, yeah, these guys are in a band called Mineral, and I remember like tagging that in my mind, and then strangely enough, I saw that album at our local Hastings, and so I just bought it and then was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Jeez. And I would argue that Mineral album is more Christian than some of the stuff we talk about anyway.
100%, yes.
But so at the time, hearing that was really big. But for the most part, I was sticking to the tried and true, like, Christian stuff through most of that time period. I'd say by senior year, late junior, senior year, I was kind of opening my mind to more stuff and getting more interested in things and not being so strict with stuff.
Yeah. It's kind of hard to remember exact timelines just because everything exploded so quickly and changed. Like, like all this happened within like a 4-year period probably, because, I think even by the end of like my senior year, I was definitely looking more into secular music, and so it was really like from like 8th grade to 11th grade or something like that, that was really a big deal. Well, obviously it was before that too, with Stephen Curtis Chapman and Jeff Moore in the Distance, stuff like that, But yeah, it just happened so fast and everything. And there was always just I guess that's another nice thing about growing up then, is that there was always something new, There was always something coming out that was just I was looking for. I was looking forward to the new Cosmos Express, or hey, that Quail album is going to be those guys from Spud Puddle, or
it's like because Christian. That time, like alternative Christian music, you had some established labels, you had some kind of channels of distribution for it to go through. It was kind of its own little world, and it was big enough to be interesting, but small enough that you could kind of stay on top of it.
Yeah, you could.
Yeah, like knowing what's coming out and in, who's in this band, who's this. And so it was really kind of fun because you just had this whole little scene that, again, even though you and I rarely got any good shows coming to our town, right, we could still be a part of it because it was so niche and small.
What was the first live thing that you saw that's part of this world?
Oh, it depends on what you call part of this world. I definitely saw that band White Heart back when I was 11 or 12. I saw that group JC Crew opening for somebody, and I remember thinking it was really cool. So that must have been one of the first ones.
Yeah.
But probably similar to you, definitely saw Newsboys.
See, we didn't get Newsboys.
Definitely got them at some point.
We got that tour that was Third Day, All Star United, 7 Day Jesus.
Okay.
That was probably the first thing I saw live in town.
The first experience I had with like cool Christian music was I somehow pestered my dad and a couple other dads into driving all of us, like multiple sets of kids, up to Cornerstone in Illinois, which from like Texas is a long way. So we went summer in 96. Already by summer in 95, I was like, ooh, this Cornerstone thing, I want to go to this. But, so for about a year I pestered and somehow we got that happen. And so Cornerstone is where I saw like all these bands and basically had my mind blown.
Yeah,
it was just like, oh my God, this is amazing. Because they were so small, they weren't coming to a small market like our towns. Because,
and they kind of avoided the South. Like, something we've talked about a little bit,
Well, I don't blame them in some ways. So yeah, that was when I first saw that. And then I was even more sold, hook, line, and sinker was into that stuff.
That would have been, what did your dad do while you were at Cornerstone?
He was real nice. My dad's not into music, period. So he would just hang out at the campsite. I don't know, read a book. I give my dad a lot of credit for that because I know he doesn't even like music. So he was really cool about just chilling and whatever. Yeah. So, yeah.
I remember probably, it may have been like late sophomore year. I remember we had a youth intern named Dan, and Dan like introduced us to so much stuff. In fact, he made us listen to Loudflower the first time. I remember we had talked him into taking Stuart and I to a Goaty Hook show in Dallas. So, and I think maybe Squad 5-0 was there too. Like, I gotta go back and look at that because I remember walking into this like upstairs, dingy but like large and wide open but like horrible acoustics room where we saw this stuff. Like, what's funny is I don't remember. In my mind, I don't remember seeing Goaty Hook, but I remember going to see Goaty Hook. But in my mind, what I remember seeing is Squad 5-0
because their live show was just so good.
Oh my God!
Yeah,
right, yeah. And on the way back, he was like, "You guys have to listen to this album." So I remember being like shoved into the back seat of his Mustang. If you know anything about Mustangs, they're too small for anybody. And I'm 6'4", so like I was just like my feet were. I was sideways, I did not have my feet in front of me, right? Like, and I just remember and my head was like too close to the speaker, and like we'd already have our eardrums blown out, and him playing Loudfire, and I mean just being like, God, turn it off, please. But later on, I would fall in love with it, of course. But yeah, that's probably the first big experience for me was that weird, dingy. Like, it wasn't even it wasn't a church. It wasn't associated. Like, it wasn't a Christian club. It was just like some place that had Goaty Hook. I gotta look. Maybe I'm fabricating this, but like that's what I remember. Yeah.
We met fall of '99, our freshman year of college, and I remember we went to a ton of shows.
Jeez.
Mostly not. We might have gone to some Christian ones, but mostly not Christian.
Right. It depends on what. Is Papa No's probably not Christian. I don't know if you want to consider them or but
because I think most are just what we were definitely more like not only listening to Christian music then, but I think for me it wasn't that I was like against it at that point. No. My taste had changed enough that the stuff I was into, we were both kind of more into like emo indie rock at that point. Exactly, so the stuff that we were into just was more not that realm, I think, for the most part.
Yeah.
So we were kind of doing that. Do
you remember when we went to Houston? We had to like get off. It was like 7 lanes wide. And we had to get off like to the right, but you were in the left lane, and you like swerved across. I think the first show we ever went to. Like, we almost died. Like, it was so bad.
I just remember we had to print out MapQuest directions because there was, nobody had smartphones and everything. Yeah, I do remember doing real stupid stuff. It's amazing we were still alive. But right, we went to a lot of shows and saw a lot of live music. But I know we were both still going to church and doing all that. And maybe I'm skipping ahead too much, but I guess one question I'm wondering, because I don't fully honestly know the answer for you, is when did you, I don't want to say when you first started to have doubts, because maybe like, that's probably really, all of us
There's
had
a lot
that.
to cover before then.
But but when did you like really start, do you remember any key points when you were like, I don't know if I fully believe this anymore? Like,
that would have been after college for me.
Okay. Was there anything, well, take us through that. I mean, was there anything in college that made you think that? Or, I mean...
So, no. Well, I mean... So, a lot of this story goes into a lot of my anxiety issues, which started to manifest. So, I told you part of the story yesterday, but I'll tell it here again. In that I was dating a girl my freshman year who... Like, we didn't even sleep together we slept together like 1 or 2 times, But she turns out that I found out about 10 years ago had faked a pregnancy scare.
With you?
With me.
Like it was your baby.
Right. Like I went to visit one time and she was like, I have something to tell you, And
can we just pause for a second? Because like, if you are listening and you grew up in the world we grew up in, I mean, I'm hoping I can feel the anxiety coming on me. You should tell me about that. And I'm not even in this world anymore or anything like that. But I just like sex outside of marriage was absolutely like the worst thing you could do.
Yes.
I mean, it might be. I'm like, murdering somebody, but I'm like, I don't know. They might think it's worth, like it's just that
literally like that's a pretty good point though, because after that, I was like, could I murder someone? Like maybe I could. Holy shit!
Right,
like those are the kind of thoughts I had to myself.
Yeah, that was considered so bad, and then like pregnancy and just I just like the amount of anxiety you must have been going through. I cannot fathom.
Right. So I was 19. I think she was 18 at the time. She's a little bit younger than me. But same year, like we graduated at the same time, and so she she's like, hey, I told you yesterday, and so like I really like after she told me like at the end of a night, like as I was dropping her off at her house, and I literally went over to a friend of mine who had his own apartment at the time. I just puked for like an hour, like it just because that's like it's like the end of the goddamn world, right? Like not only do I have to tell everyone that I've done the worst thing ever, which is have sex outside of marriage. Like I have to live with the consequences of it now, which my world is over, right? I don't get to go to college. I don't get to have a life. My life is now trying to raise a kid when I don't have a job that can pay enough, and this will be my life forever. So I'll be poor and have a kid, and like that's the end of the world for me, right?
Right.
And so that was like seriously like it just like consumed my freshman year. Like was just anxiety. Like I just like I woke up thinking about it, and I went to bed thinking about it, and I was in class thinking about it, and like so I do have an anxiety disorder, which is generalized anxiety disorder, which is basically it sounds like head pat like kind of generalized anxiety disorder, but basically what it means is that your mind grabs onto anything it can to obsess over. And so like some people are OCD, and so they obsess over like how they do things. But generalized anxiety disorder is just that your mind grabs on anything it can to obsess over and it's also a kind of a fight or flight response at all times. And so like I would I remember like I worked at an architecture firm in the winter of that which is I don't remember all the maybe it was the summer. I don't remember all the timeline very well because it's so stressful that the timeline has just disappeared into my mind. But I remember working at an architecture firm, and like I had to do this really mundane task of converting the old Unix CAD files to Windows ArchiCAD, whatever it's called,
When you said Unix, I got the spelling wrong for a second. I was like, what is he? Anyway,
UNIX.
Thank you. Got it. Okay, I was thinking something else.
To AutoCAD files. And so it was literally I ran a script and it would like open the file and save the file and everything that it needed. Like I wrote a script that would it would do everything that I needed to do. So I had to do I would just like basically run script, click on the file, and then it would do everything, right? So there was no thought involved.
Right.
And so I would just sit there for 8 hours a day thinking to myself, like, I've done the worst thing ever. Like, God could kill me right now and that'd be the right thing to do, God.
So because you've got the anxiety, pregnancy scare anxiety,
right.
But you've got the religious stuff on top of that.
Correct.
So making it infinitely worse.
Yeah.
Plus just the anxiety of being a freshman year kid in school and college and all that. But oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah, but I barely even got to focus on that, honestly, like, because I was just so consumed by this.
Sure.
Like, my grades were horrible. I did okay in architecture, but like everything outside of architecture, I did horribly on like calculus. I just bombed completely. I had to get a tutor and retake it again the next year. And like the history class, I had to retake it again the next year. Like the whole year was a waste almost. Mm. And so that was kind of my first big run-in with. I'd always had anxieties. Like I'd always had like just little things that popped up here and there in my life, but I never really could have it wasn't enough to like put a, like you couldn't have diagnosed it when I was a kid, I mean, maybe you could have if you really knew what you were looking for, but like if you were just a person, you wouldn't have been So that was my first real run-in with anxieties. Was that experience, and then, like I said, she actually faked it, which means that like she the whole like later on, a few months later, she went through this whole like while I was in like because she was actually in my hometown and I was in College Station to go to school, and she she spent like a whole week faking having a miscarriage, basically, which is just absurd. But anyways,
wow. Right.
So that I went through that in my freshman year, and which really just wrecked me, and like I'd always like, and so I went back. I went back home that summer. Like I guess that's when I worked for the architecture firm, because I remember I also helped out with I volunteered for for Vacation Bible School, which I'd always done all through high school. I'd always volunteered for Vacation Bible School, and taught classes and did whatever they needed me to do. But I remember sitting in Vacation Bible School and just being like, that's all I could think about then. Like, not so much the pregnancy thing, because that was over, right? But like the God could kill me right now, and that there would be nothing wrong with that.
Is it just this feeling of I'm a really terrible person?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, like yeah, exactly. Like I've gone too far.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what, because it was like I had like I understand like. And what you can't separate here is that this is anxiety disorder, right? You can't take that out of it. It's the trigger is a religious trigger. The trigger is coming from the religious beliefs, but it's an anxiety disorder,
right?
Right. And so like I knew like there's forgiveness, right? But in my brain was saying this is too far,
Were you one of those that found yourself like saying the Lord's Prayer like all the time?
No, but I would get to this, like I developed like this sense of like, if I'm not feeling guilty, then that's gonna start being bad too. Like if I don't feel guilty, then maybe I will do something even worse.
Oh wow! So you like almost wanted to feel guilty.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Or if I don't feel guilty, maybe then I don't deserve forgiveness or something like that. Because no matter how you slice it, the whole evangelical Christian concept of there's no works for salvation. Obviously, there are. Like believing is a work. Yeah. Like it or not, it just is. And so it's like, well, if I truly believe would I've had sex?
Oh no, gosh, yeah, really. So yeah, maybe I'm not a real believer because of my actions. Oh my gosh, yeah, that could go forever.
Exactly. And so, like I actually got resaved at this time, like...
That's what I was going to wonder, if you were, like, doing the... I shouldn't have said Lord's Prayer, like, prayer of salvation all the time. Yeah. And like,
well, no, but yes, there was at one point, yes. I got rebaptized at this time, this summer. Because, like, literally it was like... And this was how the because it's just crazy, right? But I remember like sitting in Sunday school class, like for the college kids Sunday school class over the summer, and being like, I was the last one to leave, and the teacher was still in there, and I was like, had prayed to God, like, if I need to get resaved, make, have him say something before I leave, and I walked out the door and he didn't say anything. And then I was like, well, but then I turned around, I was like, well, I know I'm wrong, so.
Wow.
Yeah. I turned back around, like, I need to get saved again. Like, not again, but I'm
right,
saying.
right.
Like, yeah. So, it's just because this is it's if you're trying to understand this through a religious context, you're not going to understand this. It's an anxiety disorder. It's that the trigger is a religious belief, right? Yeah. And so that is my first kind of bout with anxiety, and it continued on pretty heavily all through college, but then it didn't hit again really hard until it took me 5 years to graduate because I had to retake everything almost for my freshman year. Like I was fine on architecture stuff, but all my other stuff I had to retake. So I had to take another 5 years to do it, to get out of there. Plus, architecture is a hard thing to fit everything into in 4 years.
Sure.
But so in my last 2 years, it really hit again, and I was like, that's when it was really bad. And like I would just like, that's when I would just like constant. I honestly remember that period less than I remember the freshman year, because it was just like, what I do remember about it is like this like pattern of like feeling okay for a couple days and then just like being consumed by it again for a week, and just hoping for good days, and like and then in the times when I was feeling okay, I tried to get all my work done for school, which means that I would stay up for days at a time trying to do that, trying to fit it into when I wasn't being consumed by my anxieties.
Right.
And all that was stressing me out even more. And so I ended up having a giant panic attack, which I didn't know what it was at the time. To the point that like I like literally like hyperventilated and like threw up over the balcony of our apartment. And
well, I think it's important to point out that you today again can say this is anxiety, but back then, were you just thinking this was all like guilt, or what were you? I mean, was this God punishing you? Like, how are you viewing all this?
I mean, like, I went back and forth all the time, right? Like, how do you interpret this, right? Like people can say, well, don't, faith isn't the force, so you're not trying to feel it, But at the same time, like these feelings are, like that's your experience,
I'm feeling something, yeah.
Right. Like, so why am I feeling this then, right? Like we had no concept of mental illness or anxiety disorders, things like that in the Baptist church,
Yeah.
And in fact, when I finally did, like it was a big thing. Like when I finally did seek help medically, it was like, it was very, my parents were actually, they weren't unsupportive, but afterwards my dad was like, so tell me about that. He was just curious because he'd never even like occurred to him,
right.
So, and I spent, like, especially those last few years, I spent a lot of time. There was one, like, when I had that massive panic attack, I ended up going home again. All the other years I did summer school, I ended up going home again for the summer that summer. And I remember talking to so many church counselors, like, of different sorts from different churches, and so many, like, leaders in the church. And they would come over, and basically they all told me the same thing in the end, which was, pray harder and believe harder. So that was,
and that's honestly, I'm guessing that's
probably
the worst thing you could tell them, because that just adds on to it, right?
Because that means, okay, well, I'm not working hard enough to believe, then, right? Once again, I'm going to say that belief is a work, right? Because I've been there.
Yeah.
And so, like, I remember taking showers and being like, what if the rapture happens while I'm in here, and I come out of the shower and there's no one around, Like,
yeah.
And sometimes I would hope that the rapture would happen, so at least then I could know where I stood.
Wow.
Wow. Like, yeah. Yeah. So, but just so many people telling me, it's like from like I said, from like deacons in the church to like licensed counselors, like licensed church counselors, just pray harder and believe harder. And it's hard. Like you can't pray harder or believe harder,
Right.
That's just when your entire life is trying not to feel these things because that's all you're consumed by it, like how do you, this is, anyways, yeah.
And think about that message. You can't do anything to earn God's love. God loves you no matter what.
Or he doesn't.
Well, right. But
especially because I'm raised Calvinist, right? So if you're not chosen, then fuck off.
Well, there's that. Forget even all that for a minute. I'm just thinking standard evangelical fare, like, you know, God loves you no matter what. You just have to accept him in your heart, blah, blah, blah. Oh, but wait, you still need to pray harder and you need to believe more and all that stuff.
Right.
Like, you can do nothing to earn his love, but you need to pray harder and believe more. And it's just, it doesn't actually fit.
Right.
You know?
And so at this period, I was like, man, I read like every apologetics book. I read everything that C.S. Lewis ever wrote, you know. Right. I read like Spurgeon. I read I read everything I could get my hands on, trying to like, you know, because like there's also this thought of like, well, maybe you just need to purify your beliefs. Maybe your beliefs are maybe they're being infected by something that's wrong, you know. And so I would just try to like read everything I could to like try to, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because once again, even though because it is a work, like whatever. Anyways, yeah. Faith is a work.
Yeah.
So, but all that to say that these were just torturous years, honestly. Like,
sure.
Like, but it wasn't until after college I was, and I was still just as bad, honestly. Even though I, you know, think whenever there's life changes, it would distract me a little bit, you know. It would distract me enough to not be as obsessed with the guilt and stuff like that, you know, for a while. And so, but after I graduated, I had made a friend, and I actually wasn't going to my parents' church at that point anymore. I was trying a few other churches, you know, just to find somewhere that I felt that I fit in. Because honestly, also my parents' church, they had a singles department.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah, you're like, you're 23, 24, right out of school. Like, you don't really fit in the church singles department. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, that's the worst thing.
Yeah.
And so I would just go to like a college department for a different church that I enjoyed the people there.
Right, because it's much more where you are in life. Yeah. Sure.
And so, you know, because other churches were just less like rigid as far as, you know, anyways, yeah. And so I had met a friend who was a nursing student at that time. And we talked about what I wouldn't have called them anxieties at the time, you know, I would just call them my struggles or whatever, you know.
Right.
But literally we were at IHOP one night and she was just like, have you thought about going to a counselor or like looking at a diagnosis for this kind of thing? And I was just like, I don't know what that means, but I don't think that's the right thing. You know, I think that, you know,
just need to pray more.
Yeah, exactly. You know, like, well, I'm reading this book, so I think that should, you know, whatever, you know. But eventually I did do it. And I got diagnosed, you know, with generalized anxiety disorder. I started seeing a counselor. Tried a few different medications. It took a while to find a medication that worked and wasn't like mind-numbing, you know. And that was all over. That took about a year or so. And honestly, by that point, we were planning to move to Prague.
Sure.
By the time like I got everything worked out there, and seeing the counselor was helped, but it was still a very depressing time in my life. You know, it was like just rough. Like every day was rough. Like, you know, I always felt isolated and alone, and I was alone because I was in Wichita Falls, and there was no people there my age. Like there were very few people there my age, you know, who didn't want to do something other than get in a truck with big wheels and drive around in a mud pit, you know. I mean, that's true though. Like that's just what people did. And it does sound funny, but that's what people did. And that wasn't interesting to me. Like I wanted to read and listen to music and do things that were interesting to me, you know. And yeah. But to go back in time though, like I was in two bands over the period that we've already covered. I was in a punk band at the end of high school with Justin and then Stuart and a couple other people. And then later on, Stuart and his wife and I formed a band in this time period after college, before we went to Prague. The three of us, and it was kind of just like a poppy, like a catchy, like little folkish type band, you know. But yeah, so by the time I got all the medications and everything figured out, we were going to Prague, and I brought medication with me to Prague, but I didn't end up taking it. Like it just ran out, and I didn't end up needing it because just all those triggers were just gone, right? Because
You weren't surrounded by...
Right. Like, even at that point, I didn't understand triggers. Triggers are only, about 10 years ago, I thought I started therapy again with a therapist that uses cognitive behavioral therapy. And that's when we started talking about triggers. And that's what really helped me mentally to get over this kind of stuff. It still bothers me, obviously. And the medications help a ton, obviously. But I didn't know about triggers back then, right? And so when I was removed from that culture that we grew up in, all the triggers are removed, right? And so I kind of just made a deal with God / myself at that time. Like, I'm just gonna not think about this for a while. Like, I need to not be obsessed with dying all the time, and if I'm believing correctly all the time, because and so I was like, I'm just not gonna think about it. Like, I can't. Like, it's gonna kill me. Like I'm not like I'm just gonna go have sex and drink and smoke and do drugs. Like, it's gonna kill me.
Yeah, just thinking about this, right? Fear of it.
Yeah.
And by the way, I know you at the time. You were not doing those things,
right? No.
Just like, yeah,
right.
It's not like you went off the deep end. It was more just like, I need to live life normally,
right,
but not be overwhelmed by this.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so that's where so I did that, and then when I came back from Prague, I kind of reconstruction, there's a big thing today called deconstruction, right? Which I don't think I ever, and I definitely did go through deconstruction type things, because I went back to church a little bit, and there was definitely this. It was a hard period. Like, it was really rough. I mean, because, and in some ways I did deconstruct, but there was also it was more of a reconstruction of myself, right? It was more just like taking what I could really put my finger on, not faith, but like, say, this is real, right? And so I had to rebuild who I was as a person, essentially, and say, and when I did that, there were still lots of I remember driving around and just sobbing because I was like I didn't understand where God was,
yeah,
and like crying out to God and being like, where the hell are you in all this, and it's like, but I didn't approach it from a deconstruction mindset. I approached it from a reconstruction mindset, right? Of just building back who I am on solid foundations. And over time, I just found that faith didn't fit into any of those solid foundations, and that there were other things that worked better, as foundations. And that sounds really cheap, but it's not. This was hard. This was so hard.
Right.
And it wasn't as hard necessarily as going through feel like I'm going to die every day, right? But it was exhausting, and it was painful, and it was, but at least it felt like I was getting somewhere this time, so that made it worth it.
Yeah.
And so that's, I have a hard time saying this is when I lost my faith. It's just that I had to rebuild myself as a person, and there's probably an apocryphal saying by a scientist from the Renaissance era. Someone asked him, "Where is God in your theories?" And he says, I had no need for that hypothesis. And that's kind of exactly what I've found. That's my lived experience. That's me calling out for God and finding that in the end, I had no need for that hypothesis. Yeah. So that's kind of my journey away from faith, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you? When did all the... do you want to talk about, did something happen in college? Or what was your first...
Well, before I say that, I want to just reflect. It's interesting because I think both of us we're not having the standard college experience. And most people talk about college and I partied. I was like, nope, not doing that. I think
I worked my ass off and I had a lot of anxiety. That was my entire college experience.
Yeah, I didn't share your anxiety, but definitely was not partying or doing that stuff. We're part of the same church for the first part of college. Mm-hmm. And I was part of a church. I went on like a couple mission trips. One for like most of one summer, doing all that stuff. And a couple things happened during college. One, I got like more religious, if you can believe it, and got into like charismatic Christianity. So like, praying for healing, prophecy, speaking in tongues, all that stuff.
I didn't even talk about the whole what's the IHOP thing, the whole International House of Prayer thing.
Right.
Like I didn't even go into that. Did I? Holy shit, I missed that. Yeah.
So like we can talk about that. So get this right. So between my junior and senior years of college, that whole summer, I went to the International House of Prayer in Kansas City. This is 2002. And did this thing called Fire in the Night that was like was it 8 weeks? I don't know, something like that long. They called it an internship, where from like midnight to 6 every night, except for one night off a week, we were like praying in the prayer room there. And I had this crazy flip schedule and was like, completely like bought into and, just really into God and just that whole movement. And so really, really got into it. But, and in some ways, some of that stuff was crazy. And some of the stuff I don't, is not good looking back on it. But in the same sense, some of that how do I say it? I don't look back at it. Some of it I don't have bad memories of, because I think at least some of their message there was like, God is love. Like they pushed that a lot, and I did appreciate that. Not that I always grew up with a judgmental God, but that was definitely part of the message growing up.
Yeah.
And so something that was like kind of the foundation of like the love of God was good and was an improvement for me, for sure. But funny enough, through that, one of the interesting things about that is the Iraq War starts. Well, it really starts building that fall, and we don't invade till early 2003.
Yeah.
But I remember...
Like this time, 2003. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember the lead up to it. 9/11 had happened, all that stuff. I remember one of kind of the key people associated with that world at the time was kind of having doubts and was saying like, basically like, I don't think we should invade Iraq and everything. Where like the rest of the Christian world, this should sound familiar because it's happened a lot since then, was like, on board, we got to invade Iraq, blah, blah, blah. And I remember saying that was one of the first cracks in everything for me. And I remember him being like, huh. And I started looking into it more on my own and was like, this doesn't really make any sense. And I really, as far as I remember, was one of the only people that was kind of like, I don't think we should invade Iraq in that spring, because I was definitely not in that. I'm sure if I'd stepped outside of my world, there were plenty.
Right.
But in my little evangelical Christian world, nobody was saying that. But by the time I looked into it and saw all that, I was kind of like, I don't think this is right. And that helped open up, I learned about groups like Sojourners and kind of more evangelical groups that were social justice. And I guess I was getting a bigger worldview, even though it was still in Christianity, was getting a bigger view of things like that. And that really helped me to feel a little less crazy, finding other people out there that were like, yes, I believe in God, I believe in Jesus, all this, but I don't think we should be invading other countries and doing this. And that really helped. And I think also politically, I started going the other direction, because I grew up very, kind of right-wing Republican, just like everyone else. I remember in 2004 for president, I couldn't yet bring myself to vote for John Kerry. That seemed like a step too far. But I couldn't bring myself to vote for Bush and continue a war I didn't believe in. So I remember I wrote in my friend's dad, who was a chaplain at the time, for president, and cast a protest vote.
I think I voted Libertarian that election.
Yeah, I just, there was a shift then, and I was seeing things differently. And, a little bit like you, we moved to Prague in 2006 and taught English. And I was definitely I got plugged in with a church there when we got there, and did that for a while, and then just was kind of like, this isn't really me.
Yeah.
I'm also not, like you said, I'm not in a culture where anybody expects that of me.
Right.
I also remember one time I was meeting with the pastor then, like having lunch. And I remember telling him about all this cool stuff we were doing, like when we were DJing at that club and all this stuff. And I remember I saying all this, and then literally like it felt like at least, the next sentence he was like, well, what are you doing for ministry here? You need to be involved in some type of ministry. And I remember being kind of like, did you not just hear everything I was telling you? Like, isn't that kind of a ministry? Like, me being involved in these things and being a light where I am and stuff. And I just, I'll never forget that moment of just being like, you're not listening. I don't feel like you're listening to me and you're not hearing what I'm saying. And so, I mean, I'm leaving a lot of things out on this journey, but definitely that experience and not having any expectations on me and being in a completely new place really made me kind of like, think about things in a new way. And when I came back to the States, I did kind of like you. I lived back in my hometown for a year while I was kind of getting my act together and going to applying to grad schools and stuff. And I think I went to church with my parents some, but I'd been out for a while. A lot of my friends weren't there or whatever. Like, it just wasn't. I was also taking a bunch of undergrad classes trying to get credit, so I was studying a lot. So it just wasn't the same thing. And then slowly, just kind of over time, as I moved and went to grad school and then moved a few other places, it just was like, I don't know. I don't really need this. I don't think this is really helping me. This is not really my thing. And
that's a big part of my experience too, is like, as I laid it aside, I was like, this life just makes more sense. Like, I hate to say that, but because that sounds so simple, right? But it's not simple. When you're in the Christian world, it's so designed around itself that it has an inside answer for everything, right? Until you start having problems like I had, right? And then there's no answers for it. And there's cracks start to evolve.
Yeah.
And as I got outside of it, I was like, oh, that's just its own thing. Like, that's just a little bubble that those people live in, and that when you get outside of that, there's other, like, the world is big and like, and fulfilling and there's, like, that's limiting, right? And I'll say that I don't know how to say this exactly. I guess I'm going to move on to my next thing I wanted to say to you, which was, you and I have only recently talked about this, even though I think we probably had a very similar time frame for our deconversions. When I as I was deconverting, I was very like, I didn't talk to anyone about it, not because I didn't want to face it, but because I'm like, I don't need to poison anyone else with this. This is, I don't want to bring, like, I'm not trying to deconvert anyone else, right? Like, I'm just, this is where I am, and this is where everything has led me. I've followed every bit of truth that I can pick, right? And not say that I'm perfect or anything, but like, I've tried to follow the truth, and this is where I've arrived, but I don't want to take that, I don't want to take someone else's faith away from them by having this conversation with them.
Sure.
Like, I don't want to poison the well or be, whatever it is, right? So, So I just kept it to myself, honestly, for a decade more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember talking to you a little bit about it.
Yeah.
I remember you gave me a book by that guy, Dan Barker, that I read that I really thought was pretty good. And I think I was similar. I was starting to read books by like Bart Ehrman and people like that. Trying to get a sense of what I believed. And
and as I was trying to put everything back together, and because my original intention was to put my faith back together, right?
Sure.
But I read the Bible like cover to cover twice. I started studying, like, just out of curiosity. I started studying like other like Egyptian mythology and stuff. I'm like, holy crap! Like, this is very clearly a more developed version of, like, you can start to see where like Jewish mythology starts like borrowing and building their own mythology out of the people who are crossing through the Levant, like, and like, you're like, okay, well, doesn't make any sense. Like, why would the true thing be little things borrowed from big cultures,
Yeah.
that make more sense in their own original place than they do in the Jewish mythology, right? And so, anyways, it's a really complicated story, obviously, and like, the Iraq War was a big turning point for me too. But that was almost more of a political turning point for me. I felt that war really, because I was in an internship that spring semester. I remember sitting in the offices of the architecture firm and like in the break room watching the TV as like the what did George Bush call our bombings at first? You know,
I don't know. Yeah, try something stupid.
You know, where we were going to bomb the shit out of them and make them pay for everything they'd ever done. Which, by the way, was a literal sermon in my parents' church that I went to at that point.
Well, I think that brings up an important point because you said maybe just more political, but that's the thing. They were so intertwined.
Correct.
Like,
yes.
Religion and politics. And I think...
Which started pushing me out of the church, that church.
Right? Yeah, because here's the thing. When you start to realize, like, wait a minute, pastor's wrong about the Iraq War.
Right. So
what else is pastor wrong about?
The pastor celebrating the mother of all bombs is not like the best look for a pastor.
And that will definitely quickly make you start to question lots of other things when you realize, like...
Yeah, murdering Arabs is not the most... Yeah, it's just it's a bad look.
Yeah,
which is why I tried other churches when I came back from college. You know,
sure,
yeah. Because I remember sitting in church a lot and just being like, there's whole stories to go through there.
Yeah, no, and I mean, you had a pastor. I don't remember who's still at that time. Who was? I mean, I'm just to say he's a real asshole, and I mean, still is.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I can't even imagine adding that onto it. But yeah, I don't know. It's just, it's hard if you didn't grow up in it to understand how much politics was combined with religion. And I know we see that now with Trump, but even back then...
They were a little bit inseparable.
Yeah, and a lot of people are like, well, I'm not going to tell you who to vote for, but... And then basically they go through and tell you who to vote for. Yeah. You know, we don't want to be murdering babies or whatever. Yeah. And so yeah...
Speaking of, did you ever go back and research what IHOP was doing in Africa at that time period that we were involved there?
No, I did not, but I can guess.
Yeah, they pushed a lot of like regimes that were, and what they pushed those regimes to do was to be very, very authoritarian and very anti-LGBT, like to the point of like, let's go out and kill some LGBT people, you know, like
right,
like they're just what a disaster.
I know. Yeah.
God is love.
I know, but only for some people.
For the right people,
right? Yeah. I think the thing throughout all this that I'm most grateful for was being lucky enough to move, and just getting a break from all this, and being able to figure things out on my own. Really helped a lot. It's like when we were talking to Dan and Tara on that episode, and I kind of asked him about like not having these beliefs anymore, but living in the same town. I kind of wonder if I'd stayed in the same town where I would be on all this, because it really traps you a lot more.
I'm not sure that I would be alive. Like literally, I don't know that I would be alive. Like if I had stayed in Wichita Falls. If we hadn't gone to Prague, I don't know that I'd be alive.
Wow. It's tough.
Yeah.
So many expectations on you, and that culture is so strong. It's hard to step out of it. And so I really want to applaud people who are able to kind of like shake this stuff off, but still be where they grew up. And you know, it's because it's tougher to have to answer those people and talk to those people and feel like you're letting people down. But you know, you've got to figure yourself out.
Yeah. When you said, you know, about your experience in Prague, talking to that pastor, I had a very similar experience before we went to Prague, which like I would be like literally I would be like in the YMCA with like, you know, it's me and like a bunch of old guys, right? Like gray hair people, you know, and I knew them all, you know, and we'd be talking. They're like, and like, oh, you're moving to Prague, huh? I'm like, yeah, I am. They're like, what mission group are you going with? And I tell them, you know, we're just going, you know, as people. And their response wasn't that they disapproved of that. Their response was that they didn't understand that.
Right.
Like they were confused that you would leave the United States for a reason other than to do missions, other than to go save the barbarians.
Yeah.
You know? And that was also eye-opening to me, was like just the way that the people that we grew up around looked at the world outside. Even though the Czech Republic is like, I never had any culture shock there. You know?
Sure,
like,
yeah.
That's not that different than our culture.
Right.
You know, but like, they just couldn't understand why you would leave the United States other than to get people saved, you know, or to make people more like us, basically.
So we're leaving a ton out.
Yes, we are.
But let's talk more about current day and doing this podcast, because for me, I feel like this is maybe the first time that I could do this.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess what I'm trying to say is I have enough distance between the time when I kind of, to use the buzzword, deconstructed,
mm-hmm.
and now that I'm kind of feel healthy enough to say, yeah, I can look back at this and point out the goods, because there's a lot of goods in a lot of this music that we cover that I still really like. But there's also a lot of, like, to be honest, fucked up stuff that I didn't see at the time, and I've needed enough distance to kind of pull back and be like, oh, huh.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like we're unraveling stuff that we didn't really even know was
very slowly
there. Yeah, and I think I'm speaking for both of us, I don't even think we had that expectation going into this. I think we just thought more nostalgia, like this would be fun to talk about.
I mean, to a certain extent, I wanted to talk about the culture, you know, and its effects on us, but I didn't think it would be what we're doing.
Right. I think we've just, as we've gone through, it's just been hard not to kind of pull at some of these strings that are there and then be like, whoa.
And like, there's also just a lot of things that, like, I think we've gone through personally, probably, that we don't bring entirely to the podcast, you know, where, like, because I've done a ton of research and I'm still trying to figure out how to even do research on, I mentioned this to you the other day, on, like, the effects of Reformed theology, Calvinism, that kind of thing, you know, on teenagers growing up, you know?
Yeah.
like, I have not yet come to grips with how that shaped me as a person, you know? Like working to earn validation as a person, I think, is a huge part of what that did to me, you know? And like, to some extent, I can't completely complain about it, because like, it did, like, I've accomplished a lot because of that, but it was also very painful to accomplish all those things, you know? Like, I mean, not in a good way either, like, just in a,
right.
Like, because I always felt like I wasn't good enough, you know? But yeah, so yeah, there's a lot that that we have talked about, and I think there's a lot that we're going to talk about we're still searching through and trying to figure out, you know. The first thing that we ran into was probably the misogyny.
Yeah, that I think well, of course, we're white males, right? We had no idea at the time, but now that we have our eyes opened a little bit.
Right, I think I vaguely knew it was there, you know, and I think I vaguely knew that we would talk about it, but I didn't know how ubiquitous it would be, to the point that we just kind of like don't even mention it sometimes now.
Yeah, it's just,
you know, because we can't talk about it again. You
know?
Right. Or how just overwhelming it is, you know. And I think I mentioned to Jay, you know, especially with that incident with the girlfriend who faked a pregnancy, like it's only because of strong women in my life, good friends that I've had over the years, that I didn't end up like an incel or something like that, you know.
Yeah.
That I have the perspective that I have today, and even then, I'm always behind. You know, I'm not where I need to be. You know, but just the misogyny. Like, there's so much that could push you in, even in these seemingly, you know, anodyne lyrics, that is incredibly misogynistic, incredibly, I don't want to say sexist, but it's like it puts women in a place that doesn't let them not just be equal, but like doesn't let them interact on the same consciousness level or whatever to men, you know.
It's such a weird thing looking back at the music that we're covering in this podcast, because I mean, we call it Your Music Saved Us, right? On the one hand, I am so grateful to the exposure I got to so many different sounds and styles of stuff. Like, infinitely grateful that I was able to hear these styles, whether it's punk rock, whether it's hardcore, whether it's just weird stuff like the Danielson family, that like, where the hell else are you going to hear that kind of stuff and have exposure to that at that age, especially again where we were, where there's no record stores, there's no music scene. It's just, that's it. And so we both still to this day love music. And so I'm so grateful that I've like had my world opened up at a young age like that because of it all.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's amazing as we're going through this, how many of these albums, though, lyrically and thematically are just right in step with that evangelical culture. Yeah. Musically, they may be pushing the boundaries a little bit and really sound different, but man, and not all, there are exceptions, and we're definitely talking about that on the podcast, but God, some of these that I used to think were a little bit edgier, man, and now we go back and look at the lyrics, I'm like, ooh, this is exactly that culture that I thought we were escaping from by listening to this music, but man, no, just slightly different sound, but whew.
And it's reminded me of like how judgmental I was back then, you know, especially like, you know, some of like the Pocket Change album, you know, and like, and I think we barely scratched the surface of this, honestly, which is the very judgmental, like, why aren't you a better Christian kind of lyrics. You know, I think as we get into more punk, I think we're going to see more of that. And you know, I think that exists a lot in the Tooth and Nail bands, but I think it also we'll see it in you know, like some Johnny Respect stuff, and we're definitely seeing Goaty Hook. Not so much in XPX probably, but yeah, I think there's just a lot of like judgmentalism, like a lot of like, why aren't you doing better? You know, which maybe, you know, even at the time, you know, maybe has like a why am I not doing better type of thing, you know, but that's not what the lyrics say, you know, and so even if that was written from a like also me type of perspective, think about being a teenager listening to that, you know, and taking that and being like, you know what, I'm not, man, I am a piece of shit, you know, and so yeah, I mean, it's just, which also gets into a whole other psychological environment that we try to explore, though I think we are still searching for how to explore it, which is that all of these bands, because they were published in the Christian market, had this like sense of authority to them, right? And so we listen to them as leaders, and not just as fellow Christians, but as flag bearers, you know, and as people out there on the front lines of doing the right thing, you know.
And it definitely wasn't fair to the people in these bands, you know, especially when we've talked to some of them now, like they had massive expectations put on them that there's just no way they could fulfill. And it's not always, in fact, most of the time it's not their fault, but you're right, because it's in that realm, because it's not just like some random punk band, but because it's a Christian punk band, suddenly there's all these expectations put on them, and you view what they say and do as like gospel truth, and that's really problematic. You know, even when they're doing their best and doing great things, it's just not a good thing. I think all kids at that age are looking for someone to look up to, and so this just automatically like, whoop, you know, kind of fell into place and made sense.
Yeah, it's just a weird combination of culture, market, and developmental psychology, right? Like, yeah, but it's like it or not, it is the environment that we ended up growing up in, and it is, you know, I'm sure it was exhausting and for the bands, and it was shaping for us, and for good or bad.
Yeah, and I think the thing we're learning from doing this and meeting people, both listening to the podcast and people in bands, and then seeing the kind of the world that's developing right now around deconstruction, which I'm super happy about and grateful for, is there are thousands of people like us. I think we thought, I think I like to think that like I was really unique and everything, but like no, there were like thousands and the tens of thousands, probably maybe hundreds of thousands of people that were kind of having similar experiences all across the country. growing up in this realm, in a lot of people now trying to kind of shake it off a little bit.
Yeah.
So
I agree. Let's do a fun thing here and take me from your childhood through even today, if you want to, of like some bands that changed the way that you thought about music.
Oh damn. Okay, this is off the cuff, everyone. So I haven't prepared. I might change it if I had more time to think about it. But yes, okay. So early on, I remember even listening to stuff like Salty, the singing songbook. Did you listen to that ever?
No.
Okay, you missed out on that. So churchy stuff all the way through. I think some of the early ones that kind of changed things a little bit. I really remember liking the Newsboys early on and feeling like this is a little bit. I mean, this is like 12-year-old Jay. This is a little bit different. Like Not Ashamed and Going Public and those albums. This is really catchy, but it seems a little edgy. That kind of thing. I think Poor Old Lou definitely was like a kind of a cornerstone band for me. Of this is a new thing. This seems more legit. This opens it up. Definitely, I talked about it a minute ago, but definitely when I got that Mineral album, that was like that. I mean, I still love that album. That was very much like completely different world, and it connected so much lyrically with what I was feeling at the time. This like lost Christian kid, basically trying to figure his world out, but also just musically, because I'm a teenage kid listening to like emo music, so that was like perfect connection. I would probably say that Operation Ivy album as well, just so strong. In the Christian world, it's hard because now some seem more important than they did back then, and some back then seemed, really, really important. But I think some of the stuff we talked about, I mean, MXPX was really big for a while. Who else really changed the shape? Pedro the Lion, we have not talked about, but that's going to be a big one, and that's going to be a big one all the way through. I mean, I just was talking to you about his newest album. That seems so honest. I love the sound of the music, but it just seems so honest, and it's hard to find a friend was very much keyed into where I was in life when I got it. And I felt like it was really speaking to me. And by the time I entered college, we were both more getting into like emo stuff, and I'm trying to think of all those albums we liked at the time, which ones were like really big that really shifted stuff. I really liked that Braid album, Frame and Canvas. That was probably a pretty big one. For just their sound was, for me, pretty different than the stuff I was listening to, and the time changes and all that stuff. Yeah, I'm trying to think who else after that would have been really big. We both got into Arcade Fire quite a bit, and a little bit after that time period when they came out. I remember we saw them live together that summer/fall. That was a pretty big band for me for a while. Me Without You, we haven't talked about, but that was one that it's a little bit beyond the time frame or stuff, but that's one that still to this day I connected with a lot, both lyrically and just musically. Really liked a lot. There's been lots of others, but I think if I had any two that I still carry through from that time period, it's Me Without You and Pedro the Lion / David Bazan. I'm probably, you're going to say stuff and I'm going to be like, oh yeah. But I would say just off the top of my head, for me, that's it. What about you?
Yeah. So I'm going to, this is going to be like things that kind of literally change, like they kind of changed me in directions, right?
Okay.
And so, of course, I'm going to start with Michael Jackson because that's what I grew up listening to with my dad. But I also grew up listening to like Boston and stuff with him, which I really liked. Not so much Led Zeppelin or Creedence Clearwater Revival, but and then of course I have even though there's a bunch of big bands in there that started changing things. What the really big changer was, of course, Plank Eye. When I encountered Plank Eye, it was a big shift in how I understood music and just art, honestly. And then I think the next big shift for me in high school was honestly Five Iron Frenzy, even though they're not one of my favorite bands, but they kind of, I'm skipping over my introduction to punk because what Five Iron Frenzy did is say, okay, punk, but also,
Yeah.
Yeah. But also, and part of that, but also was also these very intelligent and socially aware lyrics, even though I couldn't have said that at the time, but their lyrics were very they meant a lot to me at the time and were very important for my development. And then I think, probably Cosmos Express probably really opened me up more to the pop side of things. And then after that, I'm going to skip to freshman year of college, and the band that just really almost hurt my brain when I first encountered them was Jester Brazil.
Right.
And then quickly followed up by Promise Ring and things like that still remain one of my favorites. And then I think the next thing is as minor as it might seem as an album is Jazz June's The Medicine. It's kind of a culmination of everything that had gone on in the last 5 years of music, kind of in this perfect little package of layered guitars and all the beautiful things that have been happening in emo up to that point, anyways. And then of course became Arcade Fire, which, as simple as that first album is, the as simple as Funeral was kind of, I think, changed everyone a little bit, kind of, because it's so simple but so heartfelt and so in its time, And the other thing that really changed me at that time was Feels by Animal Collective. Really changed, that really hit the pop side of me as well, and that was quickly followed by Architecture Helsinki, and there was another Totally Craft album at that time, and which has really pushed me a lot into where I am today, where I still appreciate a lot of pop stuff. I still listen to a lot of, Totally Craft is still one of my favorite bands, as well as Promise Ring, who ended up just being a pop band.
Yeah.
Even though they kind of started off as an emo band, where that's how people looked at them, they were always just a pop band, And so, and then in the current days, it's a little harder, because it's harder to break my brain again these days, but there's still things, like Introduction to My Bloody Valentine with shoegaze and stuff like that, But I would also say a little bit of introduction to rap type stuff with Tribe Called Quest, has really changed kind of how I see how music is put together. Yeah, so I think that's.
I thought of a couple others while you were talking.
Yeah.
I was very late to the game, but didn't discover the Pixies until freshman year.
Geez, yeah.
I think we both kind of did.
The freshman year is just huge.
Yeah,
right?
And we both got a hold of Doolittle, and I think both of us were like, "Oh my God, how do we not know about this?" You know, and it was years old at the time, but it was I don't know,
12 years old, 10 years,
something close to that. Yeah, I don't remember exactly when it came out, but that was a real big one. Another one that I got in high school because I was, reading enough magazines and following, but didn't really appreciate till later was just Fugazi. That really over time has really grown with me, and I still really appreciate a lot. And I think they're just phenomenal. And I'm thinking of other bands that you introduced me to at some of those times. I think I was introduced to Wolf Parade probably through you. I remember you liked the Hold Steady before they were kind of the hot thing.
Right, yeah.
And we both definitely that Separation Sunday album. We listened to that a lot. Yeah. And so good memories of a lot of stuff. And I think both you and I still are always looking for new music. We're just probably at the age we don't less time. We don't always know where to go. Exactly, but we're still into stuff. We're still trying, and
I do a lot of explorations of the past now too. The Kinks are a huge band for me.
Right.
They've really solidified my understanding of early rock and roll and pop. Beatles go along there with it, but I'm partial to the Kinks on that side. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, we could endlessly go on here, but yeah, I think it's a pretty good foundation of musical taste there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we're hoping for the podcast to continue to cover. There's plenty of albums that we haven't even touched on.
Oh, yeah.
And Clifton and I are kind of mixed sometimes when we decide which one to cover next, because there's some that we still really, really like.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes it's hard to be super objective about those.
Right.
And, and there's some that we know we're going to hate, but we think lyrically or thematically there's some stuff to really dig into.
Some important things to cover, yeah.
Yeah, and so I know we seem like we're all over the place sometimes, but that's why, is because there's just different aspects we want to touch on.
We were literally jumping around trying to, cover things that are on our mind at the time, yeah.
Well, I think this was a good conversation. Yeah, I hope everyone else enjoyed it, and I think we went longer than we thought we would. So.
I think so, yeah. Like an hour and 40 right now.
Well, should we wrap up?
Yeah.
What gotta you going now? 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 Yeah.
You want to tell them what we're doing next time?
We think what we're doing next time,
if we can put up with it,
is Stephen Curtis Chapman.
Yes.
The Great Adventure?
The Great Adventure.
Is that what the album's called?
Yeah.
Which I'm going to venture to say neither of us have listened to in close to 30 years.
Not since 1996, probably.
So this will be interesting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So brace yourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. We forgot to mention Carmen and all this. Oh, well.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, there's so many more, but we'll get there.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.